Okay, so we are going to be talking about the change in administration. And good morning, and I'll just say again, my name is Venetia, Lannon, Vice President at Edison. And we're going to be talking about, and I should say New York-GEO board member too, change in administration, geo industry impacts and actions. So I'll just start out by saying that in all change, there's an opportunity to leverage the moment, really, it's an opportunity to reinvent ourselves and our endeavors for the better. In all change, there's that opportunity to leverage the moment, to reinvent ourselves and our endeavors for the better. And I know that opportunity in all things, that opportunity and that silver lining isn't always readily apparent. But that no matter what history teaches us, that it's always there. And I want to just underscore what Congressman Tonko said. His final words was, "Let's go be positive." And that's what this is all about. I was really sort of reflecting on what Suzanne DeRoche said. We can all be really encouraged that we're in New York State and that NYSERDA in particular is is so active. We have so many pilot projects and demonstrations and legislation, and they're committed, and the state is listening to us. So this is a moment to be positive and to find what's possible in change. Congressman Tonko, I heard him speak in New York City recently, and he is someone who's seen a lot of change in administrations, right? You're in the minority, you're in the majority. And when you're in the minority, you take the time to kind of do the work so that when you get in the majority again, that you can, get right out of the blocks and advance your agenda. So change is always a really wonderful time of opportunity, even if it doesn't feel like it in the moment. So I just want to start with that. I also want to say one of the things that attracted me to New York-GEO's board is that New York-GEO is staunchly apolitical. We are an apolitical organization, and I think that's really important. So I want to start off by introducing our panelists to talk about this moment of change in administration that we're at from a number of different perspectives. And I'm going to start with Colette Gagnet, who's the Director of Energy Incentives at Eide Bailey. They're a top 20 full-service public accounting firm. Colette leads the energy incentive practice, specializing in federal tax incentives related to clean energy technologies, which were provided or expanding under the Inflation Reduction Act. So that's timely. Ryan Dougherty is next. He's is a frequent flyer. I'm sure many of you recognize him from other New York-GEO conferences. We're happy to have him back on the stage. Ryan is the executive director of the Geothermal Exchange Organization, GEO Exchange, which is the voice of the geothermal heating and cooling industry in Washington, D.C., and in state houses around the country, helping advance adoption through public policy and advocacy work. Brock Yordy, on the end there. Brock is a proud father, he wants us to know, and he's a geothermal drilling subject matter expert, co-founder of the Geothermal Drilling Association, and host for the Driller newscast. And last but certainly not least, we have John Thomas, who you just heard from, who is the CEO of WaterFurnace International, where he's been since 2017 as CEO. And he has been involved in the global HVAC industry since 1995, starting within GE Motors and Regal Beloit, and currently serves on the board of directors of GEO Exchange, as well as the board of directors and government affairs committee for AHRI, which is the HVAC Industry Trade Association. So we really have diverse perspectives to reflect on this moment of change in administration. And to kick us off, I'm going to turn it back to John Thomas to just help us set the stage a little bit. So I started us off by talking about finding the positive in change and leveraging the moment. But maybe you could talk to us, John, sort of in a nutshell. What does the geo industry sort of have going for it heading into this change, right? What's on our side?
Yeah, thank you. I got to settle down a little bit. I got a little fired up on that last talk. So I'll bring it down a couple notches. I just wanted to kind of share some nuggets to start the panel for those that may not be directly involved or historically involved in the industry. And we've got a lot of broad stakeholders here, which is great to see. We really appreciate the diversity that's in the audience. I guess I just start kind of like by highlighting the three main reasons why geothermal heating and cooling has been around for a few decades and why we exist. And it's kind of the purposeful, common sense approach of how to move heat and how to acquire heat and what the residual benefits of that are. So I'll start with the building owners and consumer homeowners. It's all about the total lifetime energy acquisition, utilization, and comfort costs to heat and cool a dwelling, a home, or a building, and making hot water. Hot water is an important element. If you're a family of four in a typical house in America, it takes more than 10% of your total energy consumption just to make your hot water. And if you have teenagers in your house, it's probably even a little more than that, especially if they're in sports. And so the cost equation, and I'll just flirt with the utility side for a minute. The average cost of electricity across the U.S., there is peril in using averages, but it is the average, is 16.5 cents a kilowatt hour. The average cost for electricity in the state of New York is 24.5 cents a kilowatt hour. That's the average cost. And electric rates will be going up. That's not an announcement of a rate base increase in the state of New York. It's just the trend that's going to happen. Energy costs in total will go up. The reality is the energy demand profile is changing quickly as decarbonization continues to progress. And so for every 1,000 homes that implement geothermal heating and cooling, you save on a cold winter day in Albany or Syracuse or Buffalo or Auburn or any other city in New York State, you're saving the utility 10 megawatts of premium, dispatchable, peak load power that they must generate, or otherwise your lights go out and your heat pump doesn't run. That 10 megawatts of peak load for every 1,000 homes is extremely expensive for the utility to invest in and maintain and operate. It can only be done with combustion gas turbines that can be dispatched within 15 minutes to create 30 megawatts to 60 megawatts of incremental power supply. The only way the utility can provide that is to work with the State Utility Commission of New York and put that cost in the rate base. It's the only way they can do it. It's why Jamie yesterday was talking about the idea of maybe geothermal heating and cooling customers should have a different rate base because the load factor, the average power consumption is much improved, and the peaks are really non-existent. And there'll be presentations later today by Jens Ponekow and others that will show you that that's real. It's absolutely real. So when I said we're the electric utility's best friend, that combination of lowering consumer cost and grid resiliency is really intertwined. It's connected with each other, lowering the capital and operating costs of the utility, shaving peak load, and then how that impacts the rate base. And the consumers of New York need help with their electric rates. The electric rates in New York are 50% above the national average. The last thing I'll talk about is domestic. For those of you that went and saw the field demonstration on Tuesday and saw the drilling rig that was putting in the borehole, what's the carbon footprint and what's the foreign enterprise import content of such said borehole? It's HDPE plastic pipe made in USA. It's bentonite clay for grout made in USA. It's graphite. I think the graphite's actually made, the team told us it's actually made in the state of New York. And it's the labor of field manufacturing, the high-skilled labor of field manufacturing that not only is domestic jobs and can't be imported, but it's jobs right here in New York State. And so when you look at the benefits to the consumer, the benefits to the electric utility to help manage infrastructure costs, and then the benefits on the economic side, this technology is just economically makes sense. From a physics standpoint, it makes sense. From an environment standpoint, it makes sense. The carbon footprint of a borehole is much, much lower than a lithium-ion utility-scale battery sitting in a distribution substation to shave peak load. So when we think about all those things, it just becomes kind of the common sense approach to heating and cooling. New York State already has 80% of all the thermal energy they need to heat and cool all their buildings and make hot water. Sorry, I'll stop there.
No, that was perfect. And I think, it's a good transition from common sense into maybe not so common sense into the belly of the beast in Washington, D.C. Ryan, can you tell us what's the latest word on the Hill regarding the Inflation Reduction Act and other, repeal, modification? What are we looking at?
Yeah, well, you heard it from the congressman, and he's right in the thick of it. We certainly have reason to be concerned, but I would say the squeaky wheel does get the grease. And we saw this. We have an illustration of what happens when the tax credits go away, because in 2017, that's exactly what happened due to what some characterized as a drafting error. It was a failure on the part of Congress in an 2015 budget planning process where the geothermal credits were left out. And we quickly became dubbed the orphans. We were the orphan tax credits throughout 2016 and 2017. And we were relentless, though. We kept going to see Congressman Tonko and others. And it was actually New York Congressman Tom Reed, who is no longer in Congress, but he represented the Ithaca and the Finger Lakes area, and he was a Republican who was a real champion for the industry. Speaker of the House at the time, Paul Ryan from Wisconsin, said, "We are not putting these credits back into law." He called them green pork and promised us they would not come back. Well, Congressman Tom Reed from New York had our back, and we picked off on a bill one by one. We did it what's called the Noah's Ark approach, where you get one Republican and one Democrat, and you add them to your bill. And we did that 59 times. We got 118 members of Congress split right down the middle. And it was enough of a bipartisan effort that Speaker Ryan eventually did put us into H.R. 1, which Trump signed during the first Trump administration. He signed it back into the credits back into law in February of 2018. It was not like flipping a light switch. The bottom fell out of the industry in 2017, and sales were down by 50%. We do not want to revisit that, and that's why it's so important that our voices are heard, that you sign on to our letter. And as Congressman Tonko said, if you do have projects, particularly in Republican districts, you let us know about them. We would love to get, over the coming weeks, Congress members to your project site. So to answer your question, Venetia, about what is going to happen, as the congressman said, the next 4 weeks are critical. Congress is coming back into session after the Easter recess next week, and they will start putting pen to paper. Speaker Johnson has promised that he will get the House's reconciliation bill out of the chamber by Memorial Day, which comes a little early this year. It's on May 26th, if I'm not mistaken. And so over the next 2 or 3 weeks, they're going to be marking up the bill. All indications are that they are going to whack at the IRA, which has been dubbed by some the low-hanging fruit. They're also talking about cuts to social safety net programs, which is a bit of a third rail. But as the congressman said, they have a large hole to fill. Big budget bills have to be deficit neutral. And so if they're going to impact the budget adversely by extending the tax cuts, they have to figure out how to pay for that with offsets. The IRA is low-hanging fruit, and so they intend to repeal significant portions of the law, including potentially the residential and commercial tax credits for geothermal, to pay for those tax credits. I said it last night. We go into Republican offices. We have broad bipartisan support at a high level within Congress. But we go to see the Republicans. We talk about all the things, all the benefits that John just mentioned. And they say, yeah, we get it. We love you guys. It's going to be a shame when we whack your tax credits. They're apologetic to us. But as I said last night, there is fear that pervades Capitol Hill. Lisa Murkowski, the senator from Alaska, said, we are all afraid. What are they afraid of? They're afraid of retaliation. Because if you take a stand and say, you know what, I love geothermal, and I'm not going to vote for a bill that repeals the geothermal tax credits, all of a sudden your phone starts ringing. And it's the president or Elon Musk saying, do you like your job? Do you want to keep your job? Do you want to be in Congress for years to come? If so, you will withdraw your reluctance and vote for this bill. And so that is the pressure that legislators are under, but we need to help them find their voice and their courage. Congressman Garbarino from Nassau County on Long Island led a letter signed by 20 of his colleagues urging Speaker Johnson and Ways and Means Chair Jason Smith to protect the tax credits. Are they going to find the courage? We need to help them do that and let them know about the projects that are happening in their district. As I said earlier, the squeaky wheel does get the grease. We've got to be persistent and consistent in our messaging.
That's great. So again, just to reiterate, while NY-GEO is a apolitical organization, this is the time to be active and be heard, to let your representatives know about the projects that are going on and your support of these tax credits. Colette, we're going to turn to you next. Maybe you could talk to us about how this change is impacting your clients, and maybe you could explain to us a little bit more about what you do. I think drillers, lobbyists, CEOs, kind of, we get the picture how they fit in here, but accountants, we might need a little help.
Yeah, so the tax nerd of the group. So I assist with different organizations and helping them understand the federal incentives, state and local incentives throughout the country, just to maximize their benefit or just kind of go after it. One thing that the Inflation Reduction Act did is that it opened up these incentives to exempt organizations. So state and local governments, public schools, nonprofits. When you look at who owns a lot of the real estate in town, it's a lot of these exempt organizations. And so helping them navigate just the federal requirements that came out is really where we spend a ton of our time. So I know there's that fear coming out of the Hill, but at the same time, when we look at where these incentives are going across the country, 80% are headed into GOP districts. So I think it's a hard argument to go back home and tell your public school that they have to pay back their $2 million in tax credits they got from going geothermal. And a lot of the projects that we worked on were actually, I know we're in New York, but in Iowa, we had several K through 12 schools that were going geothermal just from a business standpoint, even before these incentives existed. They were just implementing at the right time, and they kind of caught in right at the beginning of these incentives coming out. And so if you can make the business case for these organizations, for-profit, exempt, they're really looking to make sure they're operationally efficient with taxpayer dollars, and geothermal is an excellent way of doing that, especially as they're building and expanding their school districts. And so that's one thing that I thought was just really interesting is that, yes, we see a lot in California. California really pushes it, definitely out here in New York. But also in Middle America, they're just trying to lower the cost of energy and provide most efficient and be responsible with their taxpayers' dollars.
Great, thank you. So we're going to move now to the T word, tariffs. So John, with all the tariffs and trade wars, what's the impact you are seeing from an equipment standpoint?
Yeah, the impact we're seeing, I'd have to check social media, I guess, to see what the latest is, because it's a bit of a moving target. So, all the industry is in the process of attempting to track what your country of origin is, what the latest scoreboard says on what the tariff level is, and what impact that may have on what you need to do to recover the tariff cost impact. Where we're at today, as of, I think it was the end of the week prior to last week, when we kind of gave a 90-day break for Mexico and Canada, which was a relief. Where we're at today is China is the biggest impact at, call it 145%, and that doesn't include the tariff that pre-existed back to 2018. So that's the most punitive one that is substantive for, I would say, in general, our industry. The biggest, that impacts some components, compressors, expansion valves would be two, some other control components depending on where they're sourced from. And you've got a lot of microelectronic components that'll take a while to go through the supply chain that end up getting assembled into control boards that may be anywhere around the globe. And so those kind of secondary impacts will become trickling through. The biggest concern is right now is a majority of the R32 refrigerant on the globe, a big portion of it is processed and manufactured in China. And it doesn't matter if you're using R32 in the new low GWP world or if you're using R54B. R54B is a mixture of R32. And so we've already been notified by our refrigerant manufacturer supplier that, you know, the cost of refrigerant is going to be going up. So that'll affect everybody, including contractors. If it stays where it is, it'll be manageable. And we don't talk about pricing here at an industry association, so I'm just going to leave it that it'll be manageable. If we don't reach an agreement with Mexico, that'll be impactful. That'll be substantive because a significant number of our components are either partially fabricated and or made completely. If you talk about the compressor and the electric motor industry, the coil industry, et cetera, a lot of those components are made on the border in Mexico. My personal logic is that Mexico is too big of a strategic partner for us to not come to some level of an agreement with. And the tariff posturing is all about prompting negotiations in my mind. It's disruptive. I don't agree with the approach. I think negotiations are best done in a private room with the door closed so we all don't get so distracted by it. And as a business leader, you start to assess risk and it becomes a fundamental distraction for everybody. So my hope is that cooler heads will prevail. We'll get through some negotiations. China will come back down. That is probably the biggest wild card. But I'm optimistic that we'll find a way. The automotive industry is too intertwined with Mexico and Canada both. It would make a lot of sense to figure out how to come to an agreement within North America as the primary objective. If we don't do that, then I guess it may not make so much sense. So, sorry, that was kind of a ramble.
No, that was super helpful. So in thinking about the promise of new manufacturing sort of within the United States, I'm going to turn to you, Brock, and ask you what you think is the potential there, and also, how realistic is it to find the workforce in that space, do you think?
So we talk all of these components and whatnot as we're looking at new manufacturing or we're looking at the tariffs. PET resin is exempt right now for tariffs. Great. So we have our loops, it's petroleum industry. But in reality, tungsten carbide steel, all the things we need for this whole drill baby drill situation, as we mess with China and we mess with other places in the world, that's what our drilling community uses. And we just frankly don't have them, or we've become a good enough civilization that we want it exploited somewhere away from our people. So as we look at our Justice 40 communities and whatnot, coming back to manufacturing refrigerant or whatnot here, we're getting back into air quality and whatnot. So as we look at our manufacturing, where are we going to put it? Where are we going to ramp up? It's not going to happen next year as our workforce. And then as we look at our international partners, as we have great international partners here in drill rigs and in tooling and in technology, we're better at drilling and better together with this workforce and being able to reduce drilling footage cost, increase efficiencies, do what we need to do with what we're doing here as we look at Australia and the UK and Sweden and everything that's happening. And so for us to just say we're going to step up a manufacturing facility for more drill rigs, and right now if we look at the liftoff report, I need 26,000 drill rigs right now drilling 600 holes a year for the next 25 years to hit those goals. And then we look at the great state of New York, and New York is basically 50% of the goals that the DOE want. So if states really start participating, as we see with Massachusetts and Illinois and Colorado, we're way behind the eight ball. So from a workforce standpoint, if we're going to pull back and go back to a 2016 or 2017 or the housing crisis of 2008, those manufacturing jobs, why would I want to get involved in this? If I was a young individual in 2008, and I was a 28-year-old kid, and the oil field dropped out and Ball State started, and I won. But in reality, mom and dad stopped being in building trades and went to manufacturing for cardboard boxes and all kinds of other goofy things because we slowed down and had a downturn, and we cut our construction workforce in half.
Interesting. Okay, maybe one last question to wrap up. I'm going to throw this out to the whole panel, and thank you, Brock, for that, especially on the workforce side. Throwing this out to the whole panel, going back to sort of supply chain and tariffs, does the U.S. have a supply chain established to potentially circumvent these tariffs? I don't know, Ryan, if you want to kick us off, and then anyone else who wants to chime in terms of your thoughts there.
Yeah, well, I think I would love to hear what John has to say because he's much closer to it than I am. But I think history does lend an example in the pandemic. We started to see serious supply chain crunches, and I think a lot of the manufacturers had to scramble to source certain components on the fly. It was very difficult. It led to longer lead times, but through their determination and ingenuity, I think that they were able to see that through. I know there is sort of a concept that the tariffs will drive American manufacturing, and I think even more than the tariffs, we've seen the IRA really sort of kickstart this onshoring in a certain way. So there are more startups and more companies that are really starting to produce equipment across the clean energy space as a result of that. But there's a lot of dynamics at play, and pass the mic to John.
Yeah, it's a good question, and the answer is not. It's a little gooey. It's a little messy. I spent 20 years of my career in the motor and control space, which involves refrigerant compressors as well as air moving devices and water pump devices, all things that we use in this industry. You still have the capability to make all components required for HVAC and ground source heat pumps, water source or ground source in the U.S. You still have that capability, but you don't have the capacity to serve the industry with the migration. I mean, we got to be real with ourselves. Nixon went to China in like 1971, and that launched the beginning of a globalization effort of integrated supply chains around the globe. That's 54 years ago. We're not going to start squawking about tariffs and nationalism and reverse globally integrated supply chains in short order. It takes decades. And so that's a bit of the inertia impact of some things can move back in the U.S. There would be plants that maybe are currently mothballed in the electric motor space and or in other component spaces that could be re-implemented. You know, if you start seeing equipment from a manufacturing plant moving from Mexico into a plant in Missouri or Georgia or New York or other states, then you'll know that the shift is happening. That squeaky wheel is going to take a little bit of time. So that's why I think negotiation of fair trade guidelines has to be the real objective. I hope it's the real objective.
Colette. And just from that standpoint, you know, the Inflation Reduction Act came out a couple of years ago, right? We've been working with several foreign companies that are looking to build manufacturing plants because of those incentives in the U.S. But you don't just up and move your manufacturing plant, right? It takes time to set up. Where are you going to be? What state? You know, manufacturing generally leans heavily and historically Republican areas. And so yes, there's the investment credit side of things, but there's also the production side. So we're seeing that, but it's not a light switch, right? It takes time. You've got to build your workforce. You have to train them. You have to develop programs. We're starting to see, kind of back to the workforce, the apprenticeship programs across states. We're seeing, subcontractors build out their own programs within the state so they can meet some of the requirements that are under these incentives. So it's all good things that are coming out of these incentives. And again, the incentives shouldn't drive necessarily decisions, but they sure do help, right? At the end of the day, if you can provide a clean tech or a clean technology at the same cost or even cheaper, most Americans just care about a hot shower and cold beer, right? And if you can provide that and improve the environmental situation or climate change, I mean, that's really what you're going for.
Yeah. Hot shower and a cold beer. Brock, anything you want to add to that list to close us out?
That was definitely at 2 a.m., not in that order. We do have an awesome opportunity. And as we had the BOCES students out in the field day, and I'm looking at these individuals and talking about, am I going into construction trades? Am I going into HVAC? Our builder generation is there, but at the same time, as we talk about pulling back or pushing forward, and New York and Mass are doing great at this, but no taxes on overtime just tells me that I just took the young individual's game and I exploited them because they have an unbroken back and no commitment to a family yet. And the moment they end up wanting to have more and have the American dream, are they going to want to work 65 hours a week? And so our culture change in what's happening right now in our country, and for construction to get us back to 13 or 14 million Americans working in construction is a big lift. We're at 8.25 million Americans that work in construction. 0.5% of those work in drilling. There's 171 million people that work every day. There's 9 million open jobs right now. So we got a big sale yet, and we got to show them that there is a career and a future here. And that's going to come from all the hard work here.
Great. Thank you so much. So I just want to use my prerogative at the mic to also say, before we close the panel and give a thanks to our panelists, I just also want to give a shout out to Donovan Gordon and say it has been such a pleasure to work with you. Thank you for your leadership in the geothermal space. Donovan was there in the early days, right? It's easy now when there's 500 people in the room, but you were there in the beginning, and we really appreciate your leadership. So thank you, Donovan. So a big round of applause, too, for our panelists. Really great perspectives on, see, it's not just me. Really great perspectives on, obviously, a moment of great change and a moment of opportunity. So thank you all.